client, and the assistant city manager, of course, was in the meeting. And anyway,
you're like, I got to go. I got to record a podcast.
No, it was the other way around. They would wait. I made them wait for me, and then my wife called and said, "Can you come pick me up?" And she just works downtown, so that's when I said, "I'll be back. I gotta go pick her up." And then here we go. I'm in. I can't wait. Thank you for having me. I really do appreciate it.
Well, it's going to be fun. I think this is going to be my most challenging interview to date. Trying to figure out how to keep Howard Blackson on task here.
Well, yeah. I mean, you've had great guests, but when you got people like Nathan Norris, just softball, there's nothing there. I mean,
well, I'm not going to
give yourself a challenge.
I'm not going to give any softball questions either. So
I mean,
kidding. First of all, it's like here you are. You're in California, which is the technology hub of the world, and you have the worst video feed of anybody.
And that's because I have a crap top. My company gave me a crap top, which is the lesser of a laptop. And no, I don't disagree. And it's just, it couldn't be worse. Anyway, I'm so excited to be here. I love talking about this stuff. And so, are we recording?
Oh yeah, we're recording, man. We're live. We're rolling. So you're lucky that we're not streaming live on YouTube, although that might be something we do at some point. Just for fun.
I agree.
Howard Blackson, San Diego's most famous urbanist. Thank you for joining me. Been a while.
It has. It's good to see you, and thank you for asking me. Thank you for taking the time, because I haven't been doing that many podcasts. You're one of my favorite Gen X cheerleaders, and I'm lucky to be in the Gen X. I barely made it into the Gen X forum, but it's either very, very young people and are in the mix. I haven't done a podcast. COVID. We were doing interviews with YouTube interviews and things of that nature. And then post-COVID, everybody got back to work, and it kind of slipped off. And so here we are recording and getting back out there again. So thanks.
Well, thank you. Thank you for joining me. I'm looking forward to it. Even though I do have to ask you, like, straight off the bat, Howard, why do you hate American cities so much?
I don't hate American cities. I hate U.S. West cities a lot, especially the Southwest, Phoenix and the Los Angeleses, and even though Los Angeles does kind of come and go, it has its moments, and then they're fleeting, and then it's a sucky city, and then it comes back and it's a great city again. I can't stand Las Vegas. Las Vegas is the absolute worst of American unexceptionalism, and
you have to admit it's the best and the worst all at the same time.
Yeah, it encapsulates the condition of the American psyche in our civilization, and it makes you cry when you look at it. And luckily, and now it's all burning up, and so it's 130 degrees there today. And but anyway, it's not that I don't hate American cities, but it's just that the grid is monotonous. It was done to steal land as quickly as possible in the U.S. West before anybody knew we were really there, and it's relentless. So I do appreciate an older, city of San Diego's was a Law of the Indies, been around for a while. Taos, New Mexico, places of great character and things like that. New Orleans, of course. And so I do love Chicago is America's greatest city. New York is actually not an American city. New York is an international city. It's on the scale of a Delhi or a Mexico City or a Tokyo. It's not of America. Yeah, and so the greatest American city, in my opinion, is Chicago, and that's on a grid. So you should be happy. Yeah, and but the rest of it who cares? Kansas City, Memphis, Louisville.
Well, Howard and I have
Dallas
debated about grids for years.
Houston,
yes,
yeah.
Anyway, but there's some wonderful grids, like Savannah's a grid.
Yeah, they're wonderful. The irony of you and I debating about grids, where I was the the cranky street guy and you were the grid guy, is that at Placemakers, where we started the debates, where I worked with Jeff Dyer and Bill Dennis, the great late Bill Dennis. They were the cranky street guys, and I was the grid guy. And here I am arguing against my own what I do with you. But that was really just to kind of like this podcast, just to get out there and get some ideas in the public realm so
Yeah.
people can talk about it.
Well, I'm actually, in all seriousness, I wonder if you would describe. There's probably a bunch of people who listen who might not associate the difference between like a law of the Indies type city and a standard Western American grid city. How would you describe those and what are some of the better examples? You mentioned San Diego, Santa Fe. What are some of the better examples in your mind?
Yeah, the difference is that the law of the Andes, of course, was put on a grid because it is too easy to subdivide. It was easy to subdivide, but it was also based on a central public space, so you could save the cattle. You could protect the cattle at night, and have a green in the middle, and then you had your public buildings around the green. So there was this authoritative, real standard square that was very man-made in the middle of the wilderness. There,
Mhm,
you're in the middle of nature. You're lucky to have water, and you're not being killed
mhm,
by things. So there was the law of the Indies was more of an authoritarian settlement pattern that said, I'm in charge and I'm very
mhm,
formal here in this very informal wilderness. The U.S. West Grid was more of a subdivision um, scam to subdivide land as quickly as possible with surveys so it was just a giant land grab, speculative land grab, and there was no center idea. There was no center public space, no center governance space. There was no a delineation between public and private land. It was all private land within public streetscapes, public street networks. So I think they're quite different. One's a capitalistic speculation. The other one is a dominating authoritarian sort of pattern. Even though they're
yeah,
similar, the way they're arranged is quite different. So then in San Diego, luckily, we have the Old Town, which the Old Town has the nice
mhm,
square, has the public buildings. They're all historic now, so it's under glass. It's a historic um, district. And then you have the new town. The downtown is based on the grid, and it has a terrible square. Well, Horton Plaza was carved out of a half of a block, and we ended up with a Balboa Park, which was because of the era of the mid-century clearing in the woods. We told Rabinsky's book about Frederick Law Olmsted creating Central Park, which was the idea was a public space for people that wasn't just the king's land. So the big public space was a metaphor for the big idea of public land for people, the common people, and that was the 1840s, 1850, late 1840s, early 1850s, and then San Diego has a big public park like that because, and so does Golden Gate Park in San Francisco. St. Louis had its big forest park. The big park idea was of that era. I'm bringing that up because the the grid. If most cities are built in these um, layers of planning eras, and so whenever your city was established, whatever era that was of planning, you get those things, and then you can see how they build up over time to create that character of your place. So they're all a little different. Pioneer parks were a big deal. There's a pioneer park in Seattle, a pioneer park in Portland, and a pioneer park or whatever downtown LA's park. The pioneer park was a thing of that era too, a little later than San Diego, because San Diego had been around for 400 years with the Spanish planning pattern. So anyway, the grids become different. My favorites are places like Law of the Andes, Taos, Las Cruces, the little town outside of Las Cruces. The name escapes me, but you see these same patterns of this really nice square with the church and the government building on the end. So the issue is that the law of the Andes grid was more of the authoritative, trying to show strength, trying to show civilization had landed, and it's very formal in this informal natural wilderness. And then the U.S. grid, the was really just land speculation, um, a subdivision tool to develop private land as quickly as possible. It had no, it was for capitalism. It was for
Right.
creating towns, making places quickly, not for making a show of who we are and are establishing our culture or anything like that, which is really our culture is just capitalistic anyway. And so there's no formal squares or plazas that came out of that. San Diego's Horton Plaza was carved out, and that's true with even most U.S. West cities like the Pioneer Parks in Seattle, Portland, downtown LA. Those parks were carved out of the grid at strange intersections or main intersections, but not from the actual subdivision. Like the Law of the Indies was specifically making squares and like Savannah
Hmm.
square.
Yeah.
So they're
Yeah.
inherently
And it's
nicer.
interesting. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned the defensive mechanism of the law of the Indies town, because that was actually part of the original intention of the Savannah Squares too. But our
Yeah,
our good friend Lee Sobel has also, you may remember, has documented all the different grid towns and grid types around the country, and especially what he focused on were county seats. And
yeah,
uh, because they're really in the county seats, there were courthouse squares, town squares, etc., that
yeah.
were that were functionally part of the plan originally.
Right. Yeah, but that fell apart after you get west of the oh gosh, Rio Grande, west of Dallas.
Hmm.
That all fell apart. Those are actually from the 1840s, and U.S. West really didn't hit till the 1880s.
Hmm.
A little later, 1860s, 1880s, and that
Right.
gets back to the point of trends. So what San Diego is older than Los Angeles or Seattle or Portland because the Spaniards had landed there and formed a town so early. Um, um, so in the late 1840s is when the Great Park we did the same thing as Central Park, same thing as San Francisco's Golden Gate Park, same thing as St. Louis's uh, Forest Park. It was the Grand Park idea, which was a trend, and so
Hmm. Yep.
we'll talk about the new urbanism and the trend that has brought to city making in the U.S. and U.S. West specifically, because our cities are just a series of planning trends layered on top of each other.
Well, yeah, I think that's an interesting way to think about it. Although I think you could probably argue that a lot of the actual planning trends didn't happen until much later, towards starting in like the late 19th century. And
Sure,
there
but
were, there were,
what?
I don't know. I was going to say there were certainly planned communities before that, and the Law of the Indies was one example in the Southwest, but there weren't a lot of what you would call formal planning in most of the development of the United States after the colonial era for a long time.
Agreed. Yeah. No,
Is that, yeah,
until the mobility changed, and until how you get
yeah,
around changed and streetcar changed to that. But
right.
the idea though that of trends, and I hope we get into the discussion of the new urbanism because that's how we met.
Yeah.
That's how we've established our relationships and our conversations is through that. And um, it reminds me of the thing that I was started out was like there was the town and country planning era of the
Hmm.
1880s, and it led into the 20th century. The liberal
Right.
reform that was happening created a lot of the trends that we see today too, and they created real physical outcomes, and so I think you're going to see more of these, as technology and our civilization rushes into whatever this future is, the trends and the innovations, get shorter and shorter intervals instead of it being 500 years between trends and to 100 years to 50 years to 20 years. It's now 15 minutes, 15-minute
Yeah,
city.
no doubt. No
It'll
doubt.
be 5 minutes. Yeah. So
So Howard,
I don't know what I meant by that.
no, I,
What was your
well,
question again? Oh yeah, why do I hate U.S. cities?
cities planning, whatever. Um, Howard, for people who don't know you, why don't you talk a little bit about your background? I know you had the misfortune to attend University of Texas, which is kind of the Judas of every sports conference that it's ever been part of. But
We're back,
but
baby. We're back. Yes, that's a good start. So at the University of Texas, I didn't think much about all this except I got my degree in geography because I was doing mapping and cartography was the thing, and I was learning first generation AutoCAD. It was actually fourth, but AutoCAD 4.
mhm,
But I was doing cartography, and then when I graduated from the University of Texas, I'm from San Diego, California. I had to live in Texas for high school and college, which made me very angry. So when I graduated, I moved straight to Hawaii, just bypassed San Diego, and said, "I'm gonna go straight. I'm gonna surf for a while." And all the surfing I missed, in those
mhm,
formidable years. Um, and I was able to get a job with a landscape architect planning company that um, was during a time when Hawaii was transitioning from agriculture, sugarcane, sugar, and banana production that was moving, that was leaving to resorts. And so I was master planning large resorts and housing tracks and golf courses and things of that nature. Um, and that's when I first got really into the business. Um, but I didn't. I was really just working to I'm going to tell you my new urbanist story is what you're getting, like you get from every new
sure,
urbanist.
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And I was just working to surf, and then a friend of mine a friend from college moved to South Korea, and I went to South Korea to go say hi, try to go surfing, and I got a job with an architecture company because that was when the Asian economy was booming, the Asian tiger they called it in the early '90s,
Hmm.
mid '90s. And I stayed there for a few years. And it was when I was working in Korea that I understood, and what was happening was their middle class was rising. They were first generation cars, first generation two income families, first generation where also the elderly were going to go into retirement homes and not live with their family, and it was a very big change. And I
Hmm.
realized
Yeah.
at that moment that I was bringing a Western. Everybody wanted Southern California. I was, in Hawaii, I was designing Orange County stuff. In Korea, I was designing Orange County suburban stuff. And I realized I was destroying a culture, a very historic culture of how they took care of how families lived and took care of each other and passed down their inheritance. In Korea, your inheritance is passed down when you move in with the family with your family as you're older to take care of you, not when you die. You don't wait till you die, which is a little different. Well, they were
Mhm.
blowing that up because they were going to retire, and the young families, the middle class, didn't want the parents living with them. And so I realized there was something wrong, and that's when I started looking into really what the heck am I doing? Why am I doing it? And it was when I was working in Singapore and I was designing port facilities, but it was a port facility that was importing workers from other countries that didn't bring their car. So if there was a port we were building in from the Singapore company in the Philippines, they had Malaysian workers. If it was in Malaysia, they had Indian workers. In India, they had, everybody was being imported and nobody brought a car. So I was having to design like 10,000 units for people without a car. And that's when I
Mhm.
realized I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I need to find this. And I found the Next American Metropolis by Peter Calthorpe because he was working in San
Mhm.
Diego on the transit oriented development design
Yeah,
standards
yeah.
with Mike Stepner. That book got me like, this is what I've been missing. And if you go to the back of the book, the future anyway, Leon Creer was his mentor or his hero at Yale, with along with the others. And so from Calthorpe, I found Creer, and that was the point of like,
Mm.
okay, now I really am doing it all wrong, and it's got to work on it. And that was a long time ago, and so that's my story.
That
That was
so
great.
I
That
mean
was very good.
that that's really cool, Howard. I didn't know all aspects of that. That's really good to hear. So if
So what I
am I
ended up
right if I want
doing,
to backtrack a little bit? You
what I
only
ended up
ever
doing.
had
Sorry.
a geography degree, is that right?
Yeah, but so what I ended up doing was from Singapore. um, I went to London and I got a master's in urban design from the University of
Okay.
Westminster in London, and I worked for the Princess Foundation because I wanted to work for Leon
Okay.
Creer. Yeah, so
What years
that was
what
90s.
years were
I graduated in uh, 99, 2000. I graduated in
so it
2001. Yeah,
okay, so it was in that era where did you actually meet Creer in that area and start to get to know him?
yeah. I I
Yeah.
I
Okay.
met him briefly when I really. Yes, that's where I. But then John Anderson, who you had on here, I believe, right? You had John
Mhm.
Anderson on the spot.
Yeah.
He had
Yep.
a charrette in Chico, and 2003, and so because I we kind of knew each other, I sat at the table with Leon and Jeff Dyer, and we became very
Mhm.
close at that time because we were working together for days on end. But so yeah, so I got my
Right.
master's in urban design and started with the whole new urbanism in New York, and been there, been doing it ever since.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Okay. Well, that's really cool. So I had forgotten that you were on that. That was the Marion Park Charrette in Chico,
yeah,
which was originally going to be on, but then I wasn't there because I had a conflict. Um, and so it was one of those I'd like kicked myself ever since because of the opportunity to sit with Creer and work directly with him.
yeah. It
Okay, so
it was
that's really cool. So I think that's important. Let's tie it together then a little bit because Creer obviously has a very sharp critique of the American grid and a lot of the American grid cities. He even had a very sharp critique of Savannah. I remember when he was there that I remember one of the things he said was that if you took the landscape away, that the squares wouldn't hold together, and it was really the trees in many ways that kind of held the squares together, which is an interesting comment. But uh, his critique of American cities and more of what we might call a cranky or what we used to call a medieval town pattern was something that you really then latched onto, and I think you've studied different ways to try to adapt the American city grid for that.
yeah, yeah. One of the things, so was fortunate was I was able to bring Leon to San Diego for book tours and projects, and um, um, maybe four times. And one evening he just started. We were talking about how to make urbanism in the grid, and he came up with the idea of just this one wiggle, and it was called what we call it the career corner. And but then I
Hmm.
did something a little different. We called it Career Corner with a Blackson twist, and it became it could be a drink if you really think about it. But the idea that there it doesn't take a whole lot to create interest, and I think this is a part of the strong town sort of approach. Is that incremental, small scale. It doesn't take a whole lot, just one wiggle in the grid, that's where your center becomes, and from that center is where you can have the most mix of uses, the most intensity, and then it goes down to being middle or either residential or more this or more one thing, and then it goes back up again. So you don't have to change everything. You can't reconfigure the grid into a medieval pattern. If you did, you'll just do it block by block and
Hmm.
it becomes isolated on its own. That's not good either. It's just there was the idea of creating these centers with where offset intersections where your your viewpoint was terminated by a building, so you had to come to a stop and move around it. And it was actually the same turning configuration for buses and trucks as a roundabout. It was very simple. I think it still has
Hmm.
a lot of merit. We were able to get it into the general plan of San Diego as one of the options for um, um, road configurations. Um, and we've done one in City of Chula Vista in their town center where we just offset the grid, put a museum out there, and it's working. It's a plaza as a as the
Hmm.
100% corner intersection that you drive through. And so, but the idea of complexity, adding complexity, is what I think Leon is really saying, and that complexity comes at the scale and the speed and the dimensions of a human. You know, and that creates such
Hmm.
a diverse universe of architecture and landscape and engineering that it changes everything, which is and I know about um, the new urbanism versus conventional suburbia. Now we still build a lot of conventional suburbia, and well, I have thoughts on that. But um, uh, the idea of have a more humane or urban environment is still being struggled with, and something that you and I have been doing for 25 years plus. um, and it just takes time to change from those planning layers that we were the trends that we
Hmm.
were talking about. And I think we're in a transition, and we're still haven't achieved that whole mixed use walkable urbanism pattern that we're looking for, because the feds don't finance it. The feds don't invest in rail and financing for mixed use buildings the way they invested in freeway interchanges and federal insured single family home insurance. We don't have the federal government doing it yet. We got the state telling us to do the housing, but then you've got the local municipalities trying to figure out how to do it all. And so it's just kind of a hodgepodge, because I think we're in that transition that when you went from the pre-industrial urbanism to industrial urbanism, there was a transition. We didn't really start driving
Hmm.
cars full time. It took us about 30 years to get from cars being out there to cars dominating. And then we were in it for another
Hmm.
30 years of car domination. And I think we're in that messy middle of being out, coming out of car
Yeah.
domination. And it's just going to take a while, because the U.S. West is still fairly new. We didn't get rich. Our cities didn't get rich until 1957, 1952,
Yeah.
whereas Buffalo got rich in 1890, and New York's been
Yep.
rich four times since the 1600s. That it's when
Yeah.
your city kind of got its oomph that that
Right.
trajectory goes on for a very long time.
Yeah. I
New
mean, a couple of
Orleans,
things
yeah,
come to mind. Yeah. I mean, and I often think about this when people compare American cities to European cities, which,
dumb,
it's totally dumb because you think of a city like Amsterdam,
yeah,
it had its wealthy period 500 years ago or
exactly.
400 years ago. There
Venice
have been
has,
people. Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
Belgian cities people have been living continuously in for like 1,000 years. And, so they have a very long urban culture. And our cities are still really very new historically. A lot of them, even like my own city, like Kansas City, we go back to the late 19th century with when we had our big growth period. Really, our big wealth period was probably 1880 to 1930,
trains,
um, which was a great era for American cities to be wealthy. But then, what that meant was we were still a very young city when the car came along, and so it was, like a lot of American cities, it was very easy to kind of toss that aside and
yeah,
just build the all new, modern city for the car.
yeah. It 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 it's also the growth, the tremendous amount of growth that happened at that time was able to easily obliterate that. Um, oh gosh, sorry, my to obliterate that small town that started at the
Yeah.
crossroads between where the um, and but anyway, I think that um, those patterns, they stick, become status quo. And as like you're saying, the Belgian city, it's the status quo of patterns, and power and money has been there for 500, 600 years. I'm living in a house. This is the first building built on this land
Hmm.
in history. This is the first building. In 1927. I'm 29 blocks from downtown. There's
Hmm.
not. It's that's it, that it's we're still so young. We're the eighth largest city in the United States. There's a The alley down the street has a dirt path that's never been paved in the history of San Diego, and we're still just like I said, I can see downtown from my house, 29 blocks away. We're still young. We're still very, light. We're not a heavy urban. And Los Angeles has all those people, but they're all spread out over Los Angeles. There's very few cities in
Yeah.
the U.S. West have that compactness that comes with 500 years, 600 years of development. I mean,
Yeah.
even San Diego, we've had the law of the Indies. I talked about how old it is. It was a garrison fort that nobody wanted. The only people that were here
Hmm.
were people that were in trouble back at home. And so
Hmm.
that's our stock is people that got in trouble in Spain that had to come out here and occupy the mission for 400, 200 years before anything really happened. And even
Yeah.
then, we couldn't make it happen because we couldn't get a railroad through here.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting you describe the transition that we're in now because I feel like, I've kind of described this as America version 6.0. And really that was version 5.0 basically ended, some point with maybe let's say 20 years ago. And we have been working our way to something else since then. And there's clearly been a strong embrace of more walkable communities and a
Yeah.
different pattern of development for our cities. But it's not something that exactly just happens overnight, and it takes years and lots of investment for things to change. And like
Yeah.
just like the previous era, took massive investment for us to create it, and it still took decades.
Yeah, and that's a lot. Today, the real political crisis is for changing the cities coming from the YIMBY movement, which is, fantastic.
Hmm.
It created a how they illustrated the housing crisis and the need to build cities and urbanism, but at the same time, they want to change everything all at once. And my point is okay, how much have we changed over the last 20 years? Measure that and then project that forward. Okay, you want more? Great. We can plan for more, but you're really not going to change everything all at once because everything didn't change all at once unless you're Orange County, city in Orange County. It took years to get there, and so that's
Yeah,
getting back again to the strong towns. That's why I think strong towns' approach is such a great approach to city building, where it's incremental,
yeah.
test it, do it in small, many, like an urban acupuncture. Just get these pressure
Hmm.
points and keep on keeping on, and eventually we'll get there. And there will be a different city 20 years from now or 30 years from now,
Yeah,
because I live in a different San Diego than it was 20, 30 years ago. As you just said, it was we didn't build multifamily buildings here in the 90s for 7 years. Not one multifamily building was built in the city for 7 years here in the 90s.
hmm,
The construction
yeah. In a growing
defect
city.
in a
Yeah,
growing city.
yeah,
I mean, that's
yeah,
dramatic that we were only building suburbia for in the 90s,
yeah,
which is just
yeah.
5 years ago, 10 years ago, right?
So we'll have to talk about this another time. But since you didn't go to the CNU this year, you missed my YIMBY debate. So that was a fun deal. I'll have to tell you
Oh,
about that another time. But
yeah.
yeah. So talk to me about. I know you've been for a few years now. I've been talking about what you call the next urbanism
Yeah.
as a response to sort of the evolution of things that we all worked on and talked about together with the new urbanism. What is the next urbanism? What does that mean to you?
What it means to me is it's taking the transect that of the Andres Dewani transect of more urban to less urban, on the horizontal plane, taking it
Mhm.
vertical, because in the last century we have built our urban centers have built towers, and the towers, as Leon Creer has as properly said, are just vertical cul-de-sacs. They're just the uh, the elevator to the top of the tower. The top of the tower has the bigger units that have all the view, and then the bottom is where you have mix of uses and more intensity at the street level. Um, but so that's really just a transect on its vertical, but it's isolated and it's lot by lot or block by block. And the idea that I'm trying to do is that we are now at the point of enough vertical living and vertical working, that we should be able to have that 5 minute layer above the city that starts to step up. You know how sky bridges don't really work when they're that on that second floor. They take away from the street. Remember in Oklahoma
Mhm.
City, it has sky
Sure.
bridges everywhere. Calgary has sky bridges, and cold cities, Minneapolis, and it
Yeah.
just kills the street because that's because you've got the road right next to the road, and you don't have enough
Right.
you don't have development in between the two roads. You've over-engineered the roadway. What you have to do, if you put that sucker up at the sixth and seventh floor, where you have the natural walkability of 5 or 6, a 5 minute walk, that's a quarter-mile walk from center to edge of a 1,250 feet, is equal to 5 floors in your physical exertion of walkability. So 5-minute walk on the at the horizontal plane is equal to about 75, 65 feet in the vertical plane. So once you
Hmm.
would get to that 65, 75-foot area of that first walkability, you can create another layer of walkability that has its own infrastructure that supports it. And you're seeing a lot of, the High Line in New York because it was a trend that every town
Hmm.
proposed a High Line in their town after that. But the High Line, what what was missed of the opportunity that was missed with the High Line was understanding that you can have streets and parks at an upper level and it works if you have a very dense city like New York. So the idea is how would you do that in San Diego? And so looking at the next urbanism, in my opinion, is creating a series of vertical placemaking that's within that 5-minute walk, but it's just compacted and compressed into like 4 or 5 blocks. And then you could have 4 or 5 blocks connect to another 4 or 5, and you end up with a district, one of a careers quarters, or it just becomes a neighborhood district that has an intense amount of urbanism at a much less infrastructure expenditure and land expenditure. So that to me is the next urbanism is the actual idea of taking the new urbanist walkability, connectivity, complexity, mix of uses to the floors 6 through 12 and beyond.
I'm I'm a little blown away, Howard, because that's just very not career like
Oh,
of
and
you.
he hates it.
Um, yeah,
No,
uh, the
uh,
the man who doesn't like anything taller than what the 5-story city.
well, but he's right. But where he's wrong is that he's where I think he's wrong is that he doesn't understand that there's a context. Now we design in context. I design, if I'm in a suburban context, I can do my suburban retrofit stuff to make it more urban. But then when I'm in an urban area, I use my urban tools. Well, if we can't pretend like there isn't a context of a vertical downtown where we have buildings that are
Mhm.
20, 40 stories up and pretend like we're just going to design for the walkable part because there are walkable levels. Now it changes. It's not exactly the same repeated, but there is a context to design within, and so that's what I'm trying to do is acknowledge the context, which
So,
does which is the right thing to do.
is this kind of a response then to just development patterns that you have seen in and around downtown San Diego over the last couple of decades? Because I know there's been a lot of development of almost like the Vancouver model with the
Yeah, the
the
babies.
base of
So
some houses.
Vancouver played a role in the development of U.S. West cities, the revitalization of U.S. West cities. It was baby urbanism. It truly was a vertical cul-de-sac, and it was meant to be small point tower, not that many units, very suburban, surrounded by townhouses with a townhouse wrap. And that's his baby urbanism light. There's one door, and you go in through the parking garage. Everybody's safe. Nobody's look. Don't talk to me, and you be quiet, and I'll hide in my balcony, and then you go to Chicago. And that ends up making a figure. You have a figure ground. Well, we can also look at a
Mhm.
figure sky and see just how much, and then you take. So Vancouver is a very light figure sky. There's lots of spaces between the towers. Go to a Chicago or Toronto, New York, the space has become much more dense in the sky. And so uh, the Vancouver model in the US West created the opportunity for people to come back downtown because it was suburbia urban light. And now it's time to take that next urbanism.
Hmm.
That's where the next comes from. Fill in the gaps. Let's make some robust buildings that fill in that suburban retrofit the Vancouver Point Tower in our downtowns.
Okay.
That's where it comes from.
So
And
I don't think I've
and
seen.
it's
Have you drawn this? I don't know if I've seen it visualized.
Yeah, I presented it in Oklahoma City at the CNU with Andres Duani, who actually said it was the best presentation he's ever seen. Now,
Oh yeah, sure.
he's not prone to hyperbole, but I took it as a real compliment. Yeah, I've drawn it. There's a lot of trends right now. Kansas City actually has one of my case studies. You have a entertainment district downtown where you have a street festival area, and then you
Hmm.
go up the hotel 5 floors, and there's 3 hotels that all line up in a row that have have a entertainment zone on that fifth floor. Then you have the hotel towers, but there's lobbies in there. And my thought was looking at that was like, okay, I can do that across the street too, and I'm able to link my common areas so that here's what happens is you have the pool in the common area right across from the private balcony, back balcony of the other, and you're creating conflicts. If I can plan where in 3 dimensions, if I can plan in the 3 dimensional building where my public spaces are, my common spaces are, where my work spaces are, where my retail and where my housing is, then I can coordinate those block to block to block. Then I can begin to connect things. And so the idea also came from a 3 dimensional code, a zoning ordinance for downtowns, because our downtown has a very 2 dimensional zoning code, and it creates
Mhm.
conflicts with the big towers that come in. And so I presented that as a code for San Diego's downtown community plan. That's part of where it is too. So yeah,
That's
I have a
cool.
website, howardblackson.com. It's if you look up Next Urbanism, I've got
Okay,
a
and
few
you've got like
presentations.
yeah, the presentations on there that we could
Mm.
share. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
I'd like to do
yeah.
that.
Yeah, it had the reason why it has merit is because, in my opinion, is because we're not going to be able to, we're not going to invest in the same kind of infrastructure. We're not one of the issues with this mixed use walkable urbanism as we get further from the core is that our cities, our suburban cities, were designed with this pipe size with for this one bathroom in this large strip mall, and now we're going to add 150 bathrooms to the next to
Mhm.
150 bathrooms, and we don't have the actual utility infrastructure. We have to
Mhm.
retrofit our infrastructure for miles to get to the urbanism out on the edge, which is where we're heading further out from the core. And so I think relooking at the core with different infrastructure and different utility, and that also is cheaper and they're already built in place, is easier to fill people and housing and jobs and commerce in than trying to retrofit the utility infrastructure and create new buildings out on the edge that are going to be this mixed use walkable stuff. There is an
Yeah, it's
efficiency to
almost,
it.
that yeah, that's it's interesting because that's a different level of the practical side of things, in terms of suburban retrofit that we don't talk about much is the just the infrastructure impacts. And it really does, the more you think about that, lends itself to thinking about any kind of suburban retrofit as a very incremental, very small step
Right.
change, because there just may not be the capacity to handle a whole lot, just from the pipes and
Yeah.
sewers and everything else. And thought about
Yeah,
that.
there and there's a
That's a good
lot
way to
of
put it.
there's a Winnie Moss from as a big thing in Rotterdam that has this upper level showing how to do upper level bridging and corridors, creating new corridors at this upper level because they're not going to be for cars; it's going to be for pedestrians. It's a pedestrian corridor, and so there's examples that are out there. And one of my favorite too is the city of sorry University of California, San Diego has this new live learn district that they built that has different community, different parks and playfields and meeting areas on the ground floor that are very
Hmm.
typical. But then when it goes up 6 floors, they have the 6 floors are mostly administration and classrooms. So it has and retail and things of that nature. And then the housing is on the 6 through 12 floors above. And so on the rooftops of the mixed use buildings, it has those community amenity and parks and connections there, and it's connected in a campus as a full like a full district of about 25 acres. And then we were able to add a tower element into it, adds even more housing that dumps even more people. Instead of all on the ground floor, it dumps people into the mid floor and the ground floor. So it's really creating this immersive district that's three-dimensional places, and
Hmm.
three-dimensional uses, and it's beautiful. It's working great. So there, and you have to have places. That's what universities. You have to have somebody's got to build it with a subsidized sort of thing before anybody will start doing it privately downtown with a
Interesting.
zoning ordinance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Howard, one of the things that's interesting about you, I think, is that you live in a place that you care about a great deal and practice there, and but you've also
Why?
and you've been
Nobody.
very
No.
vocal.
But Kevin,
And
nobody asked me to do this. Why did I take this upon myself? Who do I think I am? Is the question. Like who the heck do I think I am that I'm going to be the steward of San Diego urbanism?
yeah,
That I think that was silly.
yeah,
Because
but I mean,
no.
it's interesting because most, you know how it is. Most professionals are not vocal about things in their own community.
Well,
Uh,
I don't get a whole lot of work from the certain mayors. Some mayors like me more than others. Uh, yeah, I've been fired by a mayor. And but No, I, I God, talking about myself. Okay, a good friend of mine said, who's a journalist in town, said, um, I have a unique role where and I'm fortunate. I didn't do it on purpose. It came out of my advocacy. When I found the new urbanism, I found religion. I found, passion. I was so excited about that finding purpose in my job after doing it for about 6 years or so, just kind of doing it to pay for the bills to go surfing across the world. There's a good surfing in Philippines and Bali and Singapore, there. Anyway, um, and I had this advocacy because I could see the problems now, and I was working for the county government, I was working for the city, and I was, we got to stop this, and it was like Don Quixote and tilting at windmills, and everybody said you're crazy, and then oh, by the way, I was right, and now I have credibility because 20 years ago when I was advocating for these things, everybody who said you can't do it is doing it. So I have that
mhm,
credibility. Number one. Number two, I also did advocacy with advocacy groups. So I would speak to the communities and I'd go to the communities and I'd say we can do things better. And I had a relationship with the community at large that not a lot of professionals had. So I had credibility in both the building and the built profession where I make money for developers. I help build
mhm,
cities, and I also advocate for change, and I advocate for better mixed use walkable environments that have parks and streetscapes, and oh, how about a crosswalk? Simple thing, a parklet. We were doing parklets
mhm,
so long ago, and now parklets are everywhere, right? Parklets became a thing for
mhm,
COVID. I was the parklet guy of San Diego, so which was nice.
mhm.
Um, Now it didn't. It took a long time. It took a pandemic, but so I have a bit of credibility on both sides of the issue. So whenever an issue pops up in San Diego, which always does, right? A big redevelopment here,
Mhm.
or a big project there, or a big proposal there, I have the ability to make ideas. I don't get the community saying, "Ah, you're a developer shill." No, I do, but they're few. But overall, they'll listen. And then I don't get the development community saying, "Oh, don't listen to him. He's a gadfly just trying to start trouble." I've actually, and that to me, that's just I'm so lucky and so fortunate that I'm not run out of town. Um, and I'm able to try to transcend both worlds, and it's just because, I care, I guess, and everybody sees it.
Yeah, I
It's
mean,
on my
obviously,
sleeve.
yeah, obviously, what comes through is that it's because of a love of the city that you're in and that you are
Yeah.
from, and so, I mean,
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
big part of it.
Yeah.
So does it still at this point, like in your career, does it like cost you work? Does it make you enemies?
Yeah. Um, yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. They put me
I
like
mean, I just
I get put on committees so they kind of shut me up. That's
yeah,
I get put on a committee so that they don't want if he's going to say something, we might as well have him in here, right? And that way we don't
right.
have to listen to him. And so I do get a bit of that. But no, I mean I've clients. I'm able to work for pretty much anybody, and I know a lot. I know at my age, I now know somebody in the departments that I'm working in. I try to do my best to help. I try to help the development services department as much
Did
as
we freeze
possible.
up again?
Development services in the city of San Diego is having a terrible time trying to recover from COVID, trying to do go all online, and
Oh,
it's
I'm
not
still working.
easy. I could be being an agent of change. I could be nicer, kinder about it all, because change is
Yeah.
hard for people. People don't naturally
Mhm.
embrace change, and so upsetting people. Yeah, I have it, but um, I've also um, um, I've done enough to have some credibility in it,
Right.
and even things like the Plaza de Panama in Balboa Park, I had a hand in putting that together, and everybody fought it. It was, you lose parking, and all of the museums are going to die, and um, we ended up doing the plaza. The plaza is so successful that every museum is actually upgraded, and we're about to get Norman Foster's first building in Balboa Park because they've hired him to do one of the
Interesting.
buildings on the square. So yeah, so you know, being right helps,
Yeah. And
but I guess I got
not
lucky.
and maybe not being an asshole. I think that also helps too. So
Yeah, but I have been, and I'd like to apologize to all the people out there who listen to this and go, "That guy was a jerk," because yeah, I mean, I don't think I was, you got to be a little. That's the whole new, therapy of America thing post COVID too. Is I should be you should be a little understanding that people are working with what they know the best that they can. Not everybody has the same background, the same knowledge. Not everybody got to work with Leon
mhm.
Creer, in college. So I do try now to be more gracious with the people I'm in opposition to.
Yeah. So one of the other things that you've talked about that's pretty cool and unique about San Diego for our small developer friends is you have this culture of architects becoming developers. Um, you want to talk about that for
Yeah.
a minute and how that's taken off there?
Yeah, and this will be the second time I've had the conversation today. Um, Earlier I was talking with a real estate agent who's trying to figure out how to the new process of building housing in San Diego, which has just changed dramatically in the last 4 years of the new state laws. Um, the Woodbury School of Architecture had a small annex in San Diego, and they allowed two really tremendous local architects, Jonathan Siegel and Ted Smith, who all with Rob Quigley and, are San Diego's best, and both of them are also they build their own projects. They're contractors. So they had a program called Masters in Real Estate Design, Architect as Developer. Master in Real Estate Design was MRED. And so they had about 10 to 12 students every year, and they had it for about 12 years, 13 years. It just ended 2 years ago, I think, as Woodbury's closing down in San Diego, which is too bad. But every year, 10 students would actually build a project in this with their for their diploma, and they all stayed
Hmm.
together, and they all became this club. So every year they'd graduate 10, about six of them would stay at San Diego. And the thing that they did that I admire so much and I see in the new urbanism is they would share their information. They shared comps. If somebody was building something new, they would help find comps for them to use so they could finance it. They shared the zoning tricks and tools that they learned now. You could use a covered porch to create a whole new, 12 new units. They would share um, um, uh, um, all of their performance. They would open their spreadsheets up to each other. They shared their numbers. Developers don't do that. Developers inherently hide because of speculation. They don't want, but because these folks were trained, they have the same language, the same heroes, the same knowledge, the same intent, then they were the ones that were building on that edge right out of where the safe building was that would get all the Tokyo London money. They were building at the edge of urbanism. They were finding and groundbreaking, and now there's about 60 of them, and they meet every month, and they have their own culture, and they're fantastic because now they're also doing the best work in San Diego, so they're helping to shape policy, shape regulations now. Andrew Malik, who's a father who graduated Yale with Duane and Polyzoides and Calthorpe. He was a part of all that. His son is here developing now and he's a new urbanist architect as developer guy, and
Hmm.
he's just killing it with transit oriented, affordable housing development. And it's really a unique San Diego thing because I think the thing is it saves money. The the it takes so long to get through the development process, the entitlement process, And there's so many iterations. If you don't have a design, if you're just a developer who hires a designer who's going to eventually hire a contractor, you're going to make mistakes along the way and take more time than you need, because the laws are so convoluted, the laws are so many options, that unless you know how to sketch on the fly and make changes in your concept as you're moving towards, you don't even know what you're moving towards. You can't, you
Hmm.
got to get there as quickly as possible because things are so incredibly expensive here, time wise. um, I think that they're winning in the time game, and then they share all their information so they can move much faster. There's not a lot of guessing. They know what the market's doing, and they know what the codes are doing, and they know what the construction technology is doing, and they're sharing it and they're doing it. I admire it because it does two things other that I don't think they really know they're doing, which is they use a San Diego vernacular of building materials. They mostly use a concrete base, and it has the raw concrete with the studs like the Salk Institute, which is a San Diego great
Hmm.
concrete building. And then they have the mid-century modern. They like that they're modernists.
Hmm.
Jonathan Siegel's a devout modernist. Ted's a contextualist. They have the vertical accent with the horizontal banding of the mid-century modern building with the Florida ceiling windows and balconies. And then they have some sort of little faux stainable roof that looks like a
Hmm.
butterfly roof or something like that. It acts like it looks. And they most of all have those three sorts of elements. Those are very San Diego elements, and it's a very San Diego architecture. It feels good.
Hmm.
And so I just think it's a and then it builds at the scale. It teaches, it grows, it teaches people. They hire people. They have jobs. It's job creation. They teach more people to do it. It's a growing group. Um, I think it's the economic engine for communities of now communities of concern. The communities that are stagnant market wise, they're able to get in there, build, and add jobs. They're doing great work. I couldn't be more, intrigued or proud of a certain architectural technology that's come out of this our city, because we have, that's very rare.
Yeah, it is rare. That's really interesting. It's a fascinating story, and I mean,
Yeah,
was Jonathan really the linchpin for creating all that?
I think yes, because here's what he was so successful. And he was also a very good salesman. He speaks. He's engaging. He's confident. He's handsome. He's fun. And he really made a splash with his own development. Here's what he's done though. This is what I think he's fabulous. I think he's sold. He so they all of these developers they do is rentals. So they're building assets. Well, Jonathan is this past year sold all of his apartments, and he's going to self finance a tower downtown.
Hmm. Wow.
Self finance a 22-story tower downtown.
Hmm.
Holy smokes,
Yeah.
you know. And he's also doing the vertical urbanism thing too, because he took the air rights from the historic building that's next door, and he was able to build the building. It steps up from the corner, and he's got the tall part of the building of about 50 feet in from the corner, and it steps down to the corner to the historic building, and it's all integrated into one building, and it has outdoor spaces on the sixth, seventh floor here, and then it has the pen. I use it as part of the case study for the vertical or the next urbanism too.
Interesting.
I call it the erect transect vertical transect.
Oh,
Sorry.
fantastic.
Yeah, very, very interesting and very dynamic. Ted Smith is one of those as well. So I think we're fortunate.
Yeah. Howard, where are you working these
It's a
days? I think you move around more than I do.
I Well, it's funny you say that. I've been with AVRP, which is a downtown architecture studio, for 6 years. Six
Hmm.
years. Tell me I'm moving around now.
Yeah. I mean,
I've been there, and
is
what's
that the
interesting,
longest stint you've had?
yeah, I
It's
think
gotta
so.
be.
And I don't
Yeah.
even, it's just, and COVID, I got COVID brain, right?
Yeah.
So, it doesn't feel like, no. The thing is that, and I have been focusing mostly on San Diego for the past 6 years. The reason why I had young daughters, and my wife, she works too. And so being home, not traveling like I had done with Placemakers, which was we were traveling all over
Right.
the nation and Michael Baker International. I was traveling all over, and so and I was with Stan Tech traveling all over. But being focused in San Diego has been fun. But I do feel like it's my daughters have graduated from both of them out of high school, both going into college, and so I'm able to travel more. And I look forward to, branching out my work because I am the town architect for Whitehall, Delaware,
Hmm.
which is a long
That's a
way
long
from
way
San
from San
Diego
Diego. Yeah,
right now. But I can do
yeah,
more.
no doubt.
Yeah, I can do more.
I'm a few years behind you in terms of the
And you,
kids going off to college. So you know,
well, don't you think you were architect as developer yourself?
a little bit, but and hopefully more as time goes on. I mean, that's the goal is obviously to do more, but nothing like some of the pros who've really done it, like Jonathan Siegel and others who really dived into it completely. So, but I think I talk to
Yeah, and
I
you can
talk to young architects all the time about that I think it's an incredible path that they should really start working on and try to figure out a way to get into it because architects have an unbelievable advantage in the development game with the ability to visualize and to understand zoning. It's a huge advantage.
huge advantage, and then you bring in the general contracting
Hmm.
ability to manage materials is an important part because what's happening in California now, just so you know, is the new housing laws are requiring instead of not just inclusionary housing, affordable housing, it's got inclusionary labor laws. You're going to have to
Right.
hire some form of labor, and but there should be incentives for that to offset the cost. And so that's part of the new thing that I'm working on too, is an inclusionary labor law that has different labor types of labor has different incentives associated with it, so that everybody wins. They get the work, we get San Diego gets the jobs, and we can expand the labor market. And I think that development and land and development in San Diego is the best way for a local person to stay here because you're competing with these international jobs up on the mesa for these life science and biotech and genome and
Hmm.
stuff. And those how does a San Diegan compete for that?
Yeah.
Well, land is development and building and
Right.
construction is one of the best latent economies we
Yeah.
have.
Yeah. No doubt.
So
I feel like
yeah,
we are pushing our luck with the technology here, so we should probably move to wrapping
yeah,
it up. We'll have to do it again sometime when we
sure.
figure out the internet a little bit better. But I do.
Yeah, sorry
No,
about
I
that.
mean both of us had issues. So uh, Howard, I do call this the messy city podcast when I say a messy city, a sort of a more bottom up organic type place. What's some place that comes to mind that you think about that you love?
Is a city a
Could
messy
be
city
could be
or
a neighborhood.
an area within
Could
the
be a
city?
neighborhood. That's fine.
Yeah. There's the up and coming San Diego area right now that's messy, but it's in a positive way. Which even I had Leon look at it. Is a place called Logan Heights, next to Sherman Heights, next to Barrio Logan, which is southeast San Diego, but closer to downtown. And the trolley runs through it. It used to be all commerce. Used to be warehouses. There's still a lot of warehouses there, and so some of these IMRED folks and these incremental temporary. They're called the Rad Lab folks are putting in modular housing, and
Hmm.
they're repurposing the old industrial land, which is really just storage now, and they're creating housing in common spaces. But what's really interesting is the state of California is now going to allow for four floors, single stair,
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
for apartments, up to four floors, and that single stair that'll allow our small lot, 50 by 100 lots, to actually have a variety of housing types within it
Yep.
rather than just the one stacked flat that we're getting the same thing over and over again. And that's something that's called the Roman Palazzo building type that Leon, and we when we walked around that area my journalist friend, he kept saying, well, this is perfect for that, but it was illegal until this year. So I think that messiness is going to come with the new technology on old patterns,
Yep.
and I love
Yeah.
it. It's got a trolley, and a trolley runs through it.
Interesting. All right. Well, that's great. Well, Howard,
Yeah.
good to catch up.
Thank you. And Yeah, nice to see you. Thank you
You
so
bet.
much.
Thanks. Take care.